Hello.
Hey Sophia,
Hi, how are you?
I am well. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thank
Good.
you for joining so early. I wasn't expecting people now, but it's great. I love it.
Well, I just realized that there's time built in to prep and test things, right? Because we start at quarter past.
Yes, yes. This is mainly just to check that audio and video work fine. Obviously, you must have used Zoom before, so it's very straightforward. Just to walk you through a little bit. First of all, your audio and your video works fine. It's perfect. I wouldn't change anything. Thank you for blurring the background. I will be in the back end. So basically, what happens is that this is what you will see. On the right side of the screen, there's a chat. So every question that people ask, I will just put them onto the chat and then Dominic can address them usually at the end of the discussion. As Anthony said, he's going to open up with 15 minutes of presentation. So at the beginning, I'm just going to pin him first, and then the view is going to be a gallery view. So all participants will be seen at the same time. Um, there's a little bit of a lag at the beginning. It's shorter than a minute, so I will ask you to start a minute ahead of time. It's recorded, so then Anthony will edit the recording. And then at the end, Anthony will join just to do a few minutes of closing addresses. So once you see him joining, it's about time. But I will also give you reminders throughout the course of the panel. I usually actually give 5 minutes reminder before the end.
Sure. And I think that's fine. Will our contact details be shared with attendees for follow-up?
It's up to you. I don't think the platform does that. So they can see your name, but they can't see your contact details or your email address. Um, I can check with Anthony if you want your contact details to be shared, but as a default, they're not shared.
Just putting my name.
Your audio is good, but if you stay aside from the computer, it's just when
Yeah,
it
no, I
goes
won't
to
be
the
doing that.
middle.
I'll stay here.
Okay, okay. Just making sure.
It's just that my
Um,
keyboard is there. I have another keyboard, but it's loud, so I won't use it when
got
we're
it, got it. No, no, no. This is fine.
great. Well, in that case, I might go and make myself a little coffee.
That's perfect. Yeah, yeah. You don't have to stay on the whole time. You can just mute yourself, stop the video, and then once the others join, I will basically just explain the same thing.
Fab. What time do you want me back? One.
I would say yes, one for sure. The other ones will be joining at one, so we can just have a little recap, and then I will ask you to go offline, well, mute yourself, stop the video again, and I will just let you know when to go live, usually a few minutes before.
Okay, perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
See you in 5 minutes.
Hi, Dominic. I can't hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Can't you hear me?
It's very low.
Hang on. How about that? Is it better now?
Not really. Still low.
And like that.
No.
That's
Can you
it.
try? So next to the mute button, there is a little arrow. Are you connected to your headphones?
Yes.
Could you please try increase your volume on Zoom, or I don't know if you have a setting on the headphones. I can hear you, but I'm just conscious that it's coming a bit low.
That.
Can you try say something else, please?
Is that better?
It's still a bit low.
And now? It's very loud for me.
Is it just checking if it's just me?
It's not. I can't hear you very well either, Dominic.
Maybe just try. Why don't we try without headphones?
So do I.
Yeah, so
Hello.
your sound is coming along fine. Hi, Henry. How are you?
Hello, pretty good.
Thank you for joining last minute.
Very welcome.
Can you hear me okay now?
It is so much
Yeah.
better. Yes. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for joining now. The main thing that I wanted to check is just your audio and video, which works fine. Dominic, obviously you're moderating the session, so it's very straightforward. On the right hand side, you see the chat. So I will be monitoring the backend the whole time. This is pretty much what you will see during the session. Any questions that comes through the audience, I would just put them on the chat for you to address them either in the discussion or at the end. The chat is also just for us, so if everyone wants to use it throughout the discussion, feel free to use it. I've just sent a test now, so it should appear on the right-hand side. We have a polling question, so I'm just going to set it up at the beginning of the discussion, and then towards the end, I can write the results as well, so you can address them. Your Anthony is not starting because he's on the previous panel, so it will be up to you to open up the discussion if that's okay, and just make the introductions, and then he will join at the end about a few minutes before the end of the panel, just to do some closing remarks. So when he appears, just know that you can hand it over to him and he will close it off. If that's okay with you, since you're presenting slides, we can just test them. And I would suggest the slides to be open from the beginning of the conversation, just so that it works better logistically. And I will pin them at the beginning. And then once you're done, I would just unpin them and it will open up a gallery view.
So are you the ones going through the slides, or I'm the one showing the slides?
I think it's easier if you're the one showing the slides, so you can click through at your pace.
So I need a sharing access.
Yes. I've just changed the settings. So can you share it now?
Yeah, looks like I can. Let me get to it. Can you see it?
I think it's loading. Yes.
Yep.
Okay, that's perfect. Yes, I can see them. I would suggest that you open them in the presenter mode. So if you go, if you go at the bottom, there's different modes. So next to the, yes, perfect. Okay, so I can just pin them now. And then do you want to try click through them just to make sure they all look fine?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. Okay. Okay, that sounds good. Do you have any questions? Anything that you want to ask me?
I think we're good.
Okay, perfect. So if that's okay with you now, I would leave the slides open. The session is starting in 10 minutes, so we can just go mute, turn the camera off. I will write on the chat when you're live. There is a minute of lag, so I will ask you to start at 1:14, or basically a minute before the beginning of the session, just to make sure everything is captured. And then at the end, I will usually give you a 5 minutes reminder. If you want another reminder, I can also give you that. But I usually do 5 and then 2 minutes, and then obviously Anthony will join. If you need anything from me, I will be in the back end, and then you can either use the chat or via email.
Sophia, are you still expecting Rob Bailey?
He's in the other session at the
Of
moment.
course.
Oh, yeah, I think he's just joining now. He was on panel one, so I think he's just joining now. Who knows? But yes, he's joining as well. Okay, perfect. So I would say, if you don't mind, just stop sharing your video and muting yourself for a few minutes, and then I will let you know once to go live.
All good.
Thank you. Oh, Dominic, maybe just leave the slides open.
Okay.
Thank you. Perfect. Thank you.
Hello, everybody in Europe. We're going to have an exchange during a few minutes during which we're going to discuss a few slides we put together when we were in Colombia as a Nature COP. And then we're going to have a panel with our esteemed guests, Henri from SCORE, Harlan from Marsh, and Rob from Oliver Wyman. So let's start right away with those slides. So the idea here is to put the conversation in context we're going to have later on. And so we're going to look into a reminder of what are the facts around global warming and its impact on nature. Then we're going to look into green funding or lack thereof, and then how insurance can play a role into that. So the first thing to mention here is we are all aware of climate warming, but what does it mean exactly for nature and biodiversity? So here we have some numbers. And so we know, for instance, that a +2 degree global warming Celsius means virtually the end of all coral reef, and a +3 degrees Celsius means 41% of mammals will be losing their habitats. And for butterflies, who are also a pollinator, we know that at plus 4.5% degrees Celsius, more than half of them would lose their habitat. And for climate, it has an impact as well on biodiversity. The two faces of the same coin. We know that at +3 degrees, the average length of drought would be lasting up to 10 months. And we know, based on current pledges, that we are closer to get to 3 degrees than we are to get to 1.5 degrees. So that was the context of what is at stake, what global warming means for nature. So now let's get into green finance. So we have $7 trillion of money funneled to projects that have a negative impact on nature, whereas we have only 200 billion that have a positive impact on nature-based solutions. And among those 200 billions, only 35 billions are coming from the private sector. And so this is where insurance has a role to play to unlock more of that private financing. And so insurance is there as a way to de-risk green projects. There are other institutions who can help do that, but insurance is clearly one of them. And so that's the role that the insurance companies need to play in this ecosystem. Now let's get into risk insurance and resilience. And so here there's 4 axes of development for insurance and resilience for nature. The first one is, of course, to develop more risk transfer so we can mobilize more green capital. And so that means eventually better solutions for notably regenerative agriculture. It does cost money to farmers today to switch from their current ways of working to maybe something a bit more organic, more regenerative. And so how can we help them? How can we incentivize them to do that? And it's also about how can we use better and more all the existing insurance mechanism for nature-based debt instruments. Second point is, obviously, how can we protect better natural assets? So that means indemnity insurance, that means parametric insurance as well. And how can we incentivize better habitat restorations through insurance? Then we get to trading environment. So we have a market for carbon, and we have an insurance for carbon, but we don't quite have that yet for biodiversity. So there's a few things to be done here. And the last point that can be investigated for insurance companies is around governance. Now, there's quite a few rules being enacted by different governments in the world. They provide conditions and obligations, and from there, can there be some insurance solutions as well for it? And with the last slides, before we start our penultimate slides, the last one will be coming just right after this. So here we have the missing link. What is at stake, really? What makes an insurance solution difficult, or what is the opportunity for insurance companies and anybody in the ecosystem space is this missing link where we can provide the right data, actionable data for pricing, for assessing exposure, and for monitoring that exposure over time, and that for different type of ecosystem and leading to the outcome we are looking to achieve. And we have today a good number of solutions that are available for insurance some for climate, some a bit more for nature. And I will start maybe on the left-hand side, bottom, with one concern, climate event dependencies. And so that's a company that provides data to help organizations to assess their risk due to natural event or weather event. For instance, you may have a hurricane. Your factory is maybe hurricane proof, but the bridge that goes to your factory is not. And then you have a business disruption. And so all of that can be quantified. So that's an example here coming from climate. We have a number of solutions as well existing around climate events, analytics, and insurance, with a few companies I'm mentioning here. Some provide insurance directly, some provide all the data needed to provide an insurance product. We have a few companies as well working around green parametric for different kind of products. We have the main insurance players, insurance and reinsurance players providing restorations insurance for different ecosystems, reef, mangroves, and woodland. And Henry can talk a bit about that as well later on. As I was mentioning, we do have solutions around carbon credit and carbon offset. Debt for nature swap has been around for many years. We have cat bond markets existing that are driven to climate today. They could be driven to biodiversity in the future. And now I'm getting on the right-hand side in green, solutions that do exist but are not scaled yet. Now, for instance, green insurance or resilience for the built environment, you have those organizations here working on that. For instance, Fora or WUI would be able to tell a homeowner what they need to do to make their home fireproof, for instance. And then Mitigate would provide some analytics around the impact of those mitigation measures on your risk profile for use on insurance companies. They do that only for flood today. We have other companies helping with restoration post-event. Some of them, like Mast, for instance, would do it for free. They would get paid through carbon credit. What about doing the same with nature credit? None of that exists today. We have other solutions around assessment of liability, notably with those companies mentioned here, that can help assess the risk of emerging liability for the next 20 years based on literature and the latest going on where we can see early signs of possible liability and putting a price on it. And then we have still very limited solution around by keystone species. Now we have some companies working on bees, like Bee Hero, for instance, providing plenty of data around that, but we don't see a lot of insurance around key species. And in bolded here, we have solutions that don't yet exist. Many insurance companies do invest in sustainable bonds, but they don't insure them. So more to be done here. Same around loss of revenue for transition risks, and the same around biodiversity or nature credit risk. None of that is insured today, as far as I can tell. And so now we can get into our panel discussion with Henri, Arland, and Rob. And maybe let's start with you, Rob. So you are working with a broker. Thanks for joining us. And so that gives you a good position to understand what is a market after and what can be done about it, seen from the perspective of the customer and a broker. So according to you, maybe based on your experience coming from climate, what do you see could be an easy fix for nature? Or maybe what could be a bit more challenging to come up with an insurance solution for nature based on what we see as being existing for climate today?
Yeah, okay. Let me reflect a little bit on, I guess, the work we've been doing over the last few years advising insurers on their climate and energy transition strategies. So I think the first lesson that you can easily identify is that the business case is always easiest when there's a big pool of new additional premiums to chase. And you can see that with renewables versus electric vehicles, right? The business case for renewables is more straightforward because there's a lot of new stuff that's going to get built. There's a lot of construction and operating insurance that's going to follow from that. Whereas electric vehicles are essentially just displacing internal combustion engines. Like the market is kind of staying the same. And so you can see insurers chasing the renewables in a way that perhaps you can't for electric vehicles. And I think that's a good news for nature-based solutions because a lot of this stuff should be new and additional. It shouldn't be displacing existing business. So in theory, there's a big new pie here to go after. But new risks are hard to write, right? And I think what we've seen with insurance in the energy transition is that insurers have had to really invest in building the in-house expertise, recruiting the experts, finding the people that understand these new technologies. Data is really important. I think data, in the case of nature-based solutions, is kind of interesting to us. Do we need data utilities to kind of make it easier to understand these risks? Is there a case for establishing better access to data around these sorts of projects where there is a public investment component to it? Like there would be a lot of these things, public-private partnerships, I think. And we've also seen it's really important in climate change for the insurers to be able to get involved early in the project life cycle, getting the risk engineers involved, getting the underwriters involved early to understand the risks, but also so that they're not presented with something at the end of or towards the end of the kind of the project development phase as a take it or leave it, transfer the risks or don't question, like get involved, de-risk it, and start to understand the risks more effectively. I think the third thing is when you look along the project life cycle in climate, it's possible to actually, as an insurer, identify risks all along that phase. It's not just construction and operating risks that are potentially insurable over the project life cycle. And you can kind of see this in the approach that some of these innovative insurers are taking with the voluntary carbon market, right? Where they're insuring everything through, kind of project development through to the buyers of the carbon removals themselves. And in climate, we've seen, that there has been opportunities around things like, specialty lines for things like credit, right, to de-risk offtake agreements, or performance guarantees, right, that can make financing easier to achieve. And so thinking about it from that kind of specialty point of view along the project life cycle, I think is going to be important. Critically, though, I think, as we've seen in climate change, there has to be willingness to invest on the part of the insurer. If you're sure there's an opportunity here, you don't just need to kind of hire and find the talent, many of whom are not necessarily going to be underwriters and insurance experts. They're going to be nature experts. But you also need to be able to accept, for a period at least, below target loss ratios while you grow in the space, while you learn to understand the risks better, while you build that underwriting discipline and risk excellence. And I think all of this, at the end of the day, I think nature is still quite a tricky business case for a lot of insurers to really invest against. The projects are context specific, so they can be kind of harder to scale, and it can be difficult to kind of break out of that pilot phase. Lots of these projects require the right ecosystem, the Goldilocks combination of developer, insured, government, NGO, the finance provider. So finding these opportunities, building those ecosystems takes time and effort. And of course, nature is a much less mature agenda than climate change. It's kind of harder to really predict how fast it's going to move and how quickly these opportunities are really going to become commercially viable. So I think, some careful thought and conviction on building the business cases internally and really being careful and strategic about where you want to play is going to be really important.
Thanks for that, Rob. So yes, nature is more complex than climate. And when you were saying that we may be having insurance companies involved early on in the project to help with its design and influence its design. I have some examples around that for solar farm, for instance. If an insurance company is maybe inquired a bit earlier, they can tell maybe this location is hail prone or flood prone. So that would be making your insurance quite expensive. Maybe you want to design your farm in a different way. And then you were mentioning around it's hard. We need to find the right data. Insurance companies may have to learn. So therefore, how can we help with this learning, with maybe prevention, early detection, any kind of data set that makes people more comfortable with the complexity of the risk? And so what about you, Arlen? You're also working with a broker. Rob did touch on the importance of being able to have everybody in the ecosystem on board, sharing the right understanding, sharing the right data. it's also true for insurance. It's also true for financing. So what's your take around incentivizing, making it easier for investment to come in the green space?
Yeah, so Rob and my client bases are slightly different, right? In that Rob consults for insurers, and I spend a lot of my time talking to the nature projects themselves. I think the most interesting thing that I've learned in the past year and a half working with them is that for the most part, they don't want insurance, right? They don't see insurance as their critical next step by volume. There will be, large projects that really see it as a big enabler of investment, but by and large, nature-based organizations want capital. And to your point on your slide that only 35 billion of private sector investment is going into nature positive projects, we also have to recognize that the insurance industry is a source of private sector capital. Right? We have to recognize that before we're going to build up this novel pool of underwriting premium, these projects have to have capital that they can spend on insurance. And it's very difficult having a conversation with an organization that says, well, what we really want to do is raise X amount of money in order to expand our work. How can you recognize the impacts of nature on risk? How can you recognize the impacts of nature on, say, a pool of insured assets? And for our response to be, well, once you've solved that, we can write you an insurance policy, right? Once you've managed to gather together that set of incomes that you need to offset any upfront capital investment that you get, then we've got your back. And I think there's something more that we could be doing as an industry to support that. We have very good data on some things, as what we're saying. We have areas where we could have better data. We might need to recognize that we have to pay for that data, right? That there's a role for the insurance industry to say, this is the information we want and we're willing to sponsor it, right? If it pertains to our core work, if it's relevant to risk, if it's relevant to underwriting premiums. So I think we need to recognize that we're part of the economy as well as being, this enabler that de-risks investment.
Sure. A bit like Rob, the idea is to align every possible player in the ecosystem so we can make it work. And notably first to invest in those projects and get an income out of it. So eventually from there, insurance could be easier. So you do mention, like Rob as well, that some data is available. Maybe there's some more to be found. And so what you're saying?
Well, I was just, we also have to, there's a threshold beyond which, yes, we could get more data. And we hear this a lot. This is often the first response of all finance providers, not just us, but all finance providers, that says, we need more data in order to make the best decision. It's very rare that we say at what point is there enough data, right? What is the minimum acceptable level of data rather than the perfect case?
And so that's a good question for Henri, being a reinsurance company, being the risk taker, making a decision on those projects with whatever data may be available. So maybe Henri, from your perspective at SCOR, can you let us know maybe how do you provide an answer for nature insurance? And maybe can you let us know about the latest product you may have launched a few months ago?
Yeah, sure. I can give you some element on our NatReco initiative and the product we launched. Maybe just to bounce on the ideas we heard, and I think the first one was need of capital, and this is 100% agree. We have a lot of people willing to implement nature-based solution, ecosystem restoration, but the capital is very often the blocking point. Is insurance the next step after you found the capital? Could be the case. I would tend to say not always. because we also discussed with capital providers, with investors, with banks, and their reaction was, well, how do you want me to invest if my investment is not protected? So in that case, you also turn the question around and say, if you as a project developer go to your financer and say, my project is less risky for you because it's insured already, then you start to ease the access to funding. And this is something we really wanted to do with our initiative, is how can we were focusing on ecosystem restoration and ecological restoration, how can we ease the access to funding? A second point that really I realized in the last months is, on project like that, we never see it this way, but it's always a question of capital efficiency. So if you're a private investor, if you're a fund manager, you want money back on your investment, that we understand it. But if you're a public authority, if you're an NGO, donor, well, you also want capital efficiency. You don't want money back, but you want to have an impact, right? So the question is always, if I am going to invest in a specific nature-based solution, ecosystem, whatever, and whatever is the return on investment I'm expecting, being, interest back, being impact on nature, being, impact on my population, I want to protect it. And insurance is also a tool to make sure that the capital I invested is efficient. The third point I wanted to mention, I think was Rob, I fully agree on the knowledge on ecology. On knowledge, it's a different kind of knowledge. And it's something which is new. And when we started our initiative, we were between insurance people, and we had some discussion with people coming from the ecology world. And Dominique, you were there. You remember this workshop where one of our advisor just flagged something very, very simple. You always think fire as something bad, and I say yes, but on an ecosystem, a fire is not always bad. And for me, I say, okay, now we need to discuss. Because this will impact a lot the design of the product, and this was the case. So the different mindsets and the different ways at looking at risk are key. Now, your last question on our data, and I think Harlan made it very clear. When is enough? I think it's a chicken and egg, and we already have a lot of data, and we already have some products on the market. For me now, the blocking point, at least in my court, is how do we inform the market? How do we get the people that are really in charge of this project that yes, there is insurance product on the market, and it's so big and so vast in terms of universe that it's not easy. I realized that when I was in Cali, around 25,000 people in the city all around, and I thought, well, maybe I should talk to half of them. That's super difficult. So, infusing this message in the market, yes, today, and you mentioned them in your slides, there is already a solution. Maybe not perfect, but they are there.
Thank you for that. So we go back to this idea of a chicken and egg. Chicken and egg, because to unlock green investment, you need insurance. And so maybe one of the answers for that, I was mentioning by Rob, is to have insurance companies maybe involved earlier on to ease this understanding of what is insurable and at what price. We also have this chicken and egg around data. We have mentioned there's quite a good amount of data already out there. It's about now taking a stand. Is it good enough for me? Can I make it work? And maybe I need to engineer my insurance product around what I'm comfortable with. And maybe I can't go 400% full on because I don't have quite what I need, but I can already do a few things that I'm maybe comfortable with. And so let's start with that. And maybe one aspect I would like to talk with you, Henri, you came up with a brand new product a few months ago. So you did answer all those questions to design this product. So maybe can you let us know a bit about it?
Yeah, well, so our product is really dedicated to ensuring ecosystem restoration projects. So I'm going to invest 10 million in the restoration of a specific forest or wetland. And with this 10 million, I'm going to move some ground, redesign a river, replant, take some downs out, and then I'm going to bring this ecosystem into a new state, and this ecosystem will recover and become fully functional. I mean, across maybe 20 years or 30 years or 40 years. A lot of what we heard was during the 3 to 5 first years of implementation, if something happened, I have to do it again. I have to replant, I have to remove my errors, I have to. So we thought, okay, maybe there is here a very clear risk we can insure. As an agronomist, I started with models, data, weather, which I like very much, and we thought maybe the parametric would be a good one, and I mean, and parametric can be very efficient on specific things, but in that case we had several issues. Number one, ecosystem, you mentioned it, are very different from one another. So you should develop a product per ecosystem, which is, when you start to work at scale, very difficult. And the second one was coming back to my point of fire. Detect a fire is quite easy, right? So if you say, I'm going to count the number of fire in my pricing, and then I'm going to pay each time there is a fire, that works. The problem is, are you able to assess the impact of the fire? Because if the impact is positive on your ecosystem, everything is fine. You don't need to pay out. So we really designed a product which is closer to a damage base and which is done through a loss assessment with knowledge on ecology with our partners, the Society for Ecological Restoration, and really splitting into the event happening on one side and the impact on the other side. And the last thing I would like to add before the Harlan asks question, I see that, is we also decided to make sure that we ensure nature positive projects. So the Society for Ecological Restoration is reviewing each and every plan of restoration, making sure we don't insure bad projects.
So before maybe giving the hand to Harlan, so we understand the point is to find the right partners with whom we can have the right expertise to make it work. Rob was mentioning before, private-public partnerships, same idea. Nobody has the answer on their own, but collectively we can make it work. Harlan, you wanted to say?
Yeah, I was just going to sort of agree with what Henri's saying and add some observations that some of my clients and prospects have made, which is that because by and large we think about things as financial outcomes, right? We're in a financial institution, and we think if a loss happens, you'll suffer some costs and you're going to have to spend those costs again, and that's bad, right? Henri's very good point about capital efficiency notwithstanding. Often when you talk to ecologists or agronomists or people who work for organizations that have a large amount of natural capital, they're less worried about cash. They're much more interested in the impacts of their interventions.
Yep.
And having a conversation in a language that our clients understand and things that they genuinely care about is a very good approach. Right, we need to make sure that we're not just talking about this in financial terms, but in the ecosystem outcomes that they are concerned with. And Henri and I have had a couple of chats about the best ways to do that, and there are developments down the line. But something that I think we need to bear in mind is, no matter how much money we put into something, you can't rebuild an ecosystem any faster than it will take, right? So the best things that we can do are to support that resilience of it, or interventionist funding to prevent cascade failures, to prevent major losses, and then to work with ecologists to say, okay, so one fire doesn't matter. Great. It's good for the ecosystem. How many fires is too many fires?
Yep.
Right. How many fire, then drought, then fire, then drought is going to kill this? At what point will you need to intervene? Because as much as our clients think about things in that holistic, how is the ecosystem going to function sense, we can also encourage them to think about the best case. Right? What would you like the project to do? Yeah, okay, it's not going to go horribly wrong, but what would you like it to do? And how do we help you achieve that?
That's an interesting point, Arne. It goes back to basically the TNFD ways of working, impact and dependencies, being able to put a number onto that. Once we have that number, it's easier for companies to define what is their risk exposure. And from there is a potential solution for it. How can I prevent? How can I mitigate? And for what I cannot, what can I live with? And what do I need to insure?
I would say that it's slightly different. When we talk about TNFD and nature-based projects, you get into some slightly funny ground because you are the natural asset, right? So 100% of your business is at risk. You are very high risk. You are a bad, some of those frameworks are less effective when we're talking about nature-heavy organizations or businesses. So I would just be careful of trying to make too neat an analogy.
Okay. Maybe one point we ought to discuss, if we consider the nascency of the carbon insurance market, already we have at least 4 players that I know of based in Europe doing it. Do you see collectively here in the panel a future for the same idea around biodiversity or nature credit? That could be a way to put a price on nature and insure it. Is there anyone who has an answer to that? Nature or biodiversity credit insurance? Are we far off, or that's something coming?
I mean, in the UK where we are, we have the biodiversity net gain regulation.
Yes.
It's a compliance mechanism, which creates a compliance market, essentially creates a compliance market for biodiversity offsets. And that definitely potentially creates opportunities for insurers. There are potentially insurable risks around that market, right? So, and I think like maybe one lesson from what we've seen with voluntary carbon markets is that compliance markets may present a more stable opportunity for insurers. I mean, when you kind of look at what's happened with the voluntary carbon market recently, we've not seen the kind of the big numbers that were being, initially predicted for the size of the market. We're not on course for those opportunities. It looks like a lot of the demand, at least for high integrity removals, is coming from a very small number of sort of large tech companies in Europe. So it's not a deep or liquid market at all, which kind of creates a challenge for insurers because there's not many market participants potentially. But you can also see on the carbon side, with things like CORSIA and those sorts of things, and like I think the compliance markets may actually present more of an opportunity on the carbon side, and I can see that happening on the nature side as well. I don't think the UK's biodiversity net gain regulation will be a one-off. I think other countries and governments are looking at it quite closely and trying to figure out whether they can do something similar. And so I do see real opportunities there for insurers to pursue.
And maybe as a reminder for the audience, net biodiversity gain in the UK is 10% for any project developer. They have to provide a 10% improvement in the biodiversity post-delivery of the project. I'm not so sure about the enforcement as well. Still unclear to me how it's going to be monitored. But this is where, because there's an obligation, there's possibly a need for insurance. Before we get to the polling, is there maybe one last comment from anybody in the panel. I understand, Henri, you have insurance solutions for the net biodiversity gain in the UK already. So what do you think of it? And have you seen similar development in other countries?
For one comment on this one, I think the is biodiversity equivalent to carbon in terms of organization is going to be very difficult, because 1 ton of carbon is 1 ton of carbon. The biodiversity in an ecosystem is much more complex, number one. Number two, my conclusion is, but yes, but do we have to wait for this market to be fully developed and stable for us to intervene and to help to solve the problem? I don't think so. And this is why if we think about these 3 layers of the ground itself, then layer 2, the ecosystem, and layer 3, all the ecosystem services on the top of it, being credits of any kind, of being energy or tourism, whatever. Our product, we decided to say, okay, we don't know about the future of for the moment of this ecosystem services market. Let's ensure the ecosystem, which is the asset itself. So yes, you're right. In the framework, and we see a strong push of the biodiversity net gain in the UK, there is a lot of demand to protect ecosystem restoration in the framework of this compensation.
So regulation may make the market, at least at the very beginning. We have some poll results that we can share. So the question was, where is your company on nature-based solutions? And the answer was roughly, we are studying, we're investigating, we are trying to understand what we need to do. So the first answer at 33% was, we have done nothing in this space yet. So the second answer was, we are exploring feasibility of a specific solutions at 33%. And then we have companies a bit more advanced saying that they have already one nature-based solution live, and others saying they are identifying opportunity that's part of the risk assessment process. So it goes back to, first, we have to do this risk assessment process. There are some framework available for that, quite many, in fact. Maybe the issue is to pick one. What do you think of those answers, panel?
I would be very interested to know what the audience considers as a nature-based solution. I suspect that it's a nature-related solution. So given our audience, there may well be people who are present who are looking to insure nature. I'd be interested to know whether it's a nature-based solution to the work they already do. Is it a nature-based risk management tool, or is it a parametric agri policy? Those are very different things.
Maybe sorry.
Please go ahead.
One comment I would like to do on what is a nature-based solution. I think there is an extremely good document from the IFC called Catalog of Nature-Based Solution for Infrastructure. And I think like 80 pages. And this is very, very useful and very interesting to understand that the impact of nature-based solution are, multiple. You have example in there on energy, nothing to do with carbon. The number of times you have to clean a dam if you restore the ecosystem above. Lots of different things.
And maybe, can you share an example, anybody in the panel, an example of an ecosystem that is looking for a solution that has not been found yet? Do you have any to give?
Can you repeat the question, please, Dominic?
Yeah, I was wondering, because you are dealing with the market on a daily basis, if you have an example of an ecosystem looking for a nature-based solution that would be understood and insurable. Maybe it's not yet the case, but you have the request for it.
In terms of types of ecosystem, I think it's the question is very wide, because if you go from the Arctic to the
precise. So we have solutions existing today for mangroves, coral reefs, for woodland as well. What could be the next one?
Well, today we coming back to the partner we have, Society for Ecological Restoration. They have ecological restoration standard for all and every main terrestrial ecosystem. Marine is very, very different, and there is specific initiatives on the coral reef, very famous, but on the rest, there is a lot of things available today. A lot of things available. The question is, how do we implement it?
Okay. So the insurance market may be more developed than we may think. We have solutions available today. We have possibly the right partners we can connect with to get around the data issue and then provide an insurance solution for it. Is there any last words from anybody in the panel? What could be the next, for you individually, I would say, what is the next action that you are working on for nature? And are you close to getting it, or you still need a few more partners? What's your vision here? Maybe one after the other. Maybe we'll start with you, Henri.
Well, we launched this product in May. We are in a proof of concept. Traction is good. We called it initiative because we think we will have more than one product. If you start with the concept of ecological restoration, we do at least 3 phases. We have the product only for the number 1, right? We already have discussion in the UK about the management, the second phase, after you do the implementation. The protection is another one. The outcome of which is not insured for the moment, the value of the outcome of the project is not on the table. So we know we have at least 3 or more product to develop in the next 24 months. So hopefully we'll have another one in 2025, and we'll carry on.
Okay, so still plenty to be done and
Yes.
willingness to do so. How about you, maybe Rob?
So we've been supporting something called the African Natural Capital Alliance now for 2 years, which is a multi-stakeholder initiative, but it involves a lot of African financial institutions, banks, life insurers and non-life insurers and investors. And as part of that work, we've been taking them through the whole kind of TNFD pilot process. A number of them are going to be TNFD early adopters, and we're now moving on to a new phase of the work, which will be much more focused on mobilizing their balance sheets for nature-based solutions in Africa. So yeah, that's what we'll be focusing on with them over the next 18 months or so. So very exciting, and this has been a very useful conversation in that regard.
Your busy times. 2 minutes left. How about you, Arland?
Similar sort of exercise to Rob, but with some UK-based natural capital owners. We had a roundtable a few months ago, and we have a follow-up in Q1 of the coming year, which is looking to line up the right players in terms of capital providers, service providers or developers, and then infrastructure owners who might pay that return, so that we can start to look at nature as a risk management tool, not just as an asset that needs to be insured, and find new ways of attracting capital on that basis.
Yeah, risk management for prevention, mitigation, and value-based services. And that's it for us. So maybe we can give it back to Anthony for the next event.
Brilliant. Thank you, Dominique. Excellent job moderating. Thank you so much, Rob, Henri, and Harland. Great conversation. I think you encapsulated this is very complex. There's huge opportunity there, but I think the message that came through most clearly for me was around this building of an ecosystem and the need to get the right stakeholders around the table and have these conversations. But yeah, we're just out of time. So thank you to everyone. Thank you also to Nadine, who I know I probably didn't have a chance to thank when we were live as we cut over. Yeah, without further ado, Better Insurance Network will see everyone in 2025. We have lots of exciting things coming up. Particularly in March, we're launching Sustain Festival, which is a global program of events, which hopefully lots of you can attend and participate in. So yeah, thank you all so much, and we look forward to continuing the conversation.
Thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.